She was a beautiful black nurse, pregnant, heartbroken after a devastating divorce, collapsing alone on a cold street. But then, a rich, handsome CEO doctor appeared, and everything changed. He whispered, "You're mine now," and her life would never be the same. Betrayal, passion, danger, and a miracle baby. Watch how one man saves her and claims her heart forever. Hey guys, I feel like you don't want to listen to me sometimes. I feel it. All the likes, the comments, the love. It matters so much. Can I just quit? You know, when the channel isn't appreciated, it really hurts. But with a heavy heart, and because I can't leave you hanging, let's dive into today's story. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment. Tina walked silently through the gleaming hospital corridors, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, each step echoing like a lonely drum in her heart. The walls seemed to close in on her as the fluorescent lights flickered faintly above, a reflection of the storm brewing inside her. Her smooth brown skin glowed under the harsh hospital lights, but it was a glow that masked an inner fatigue, a tiredness not just of body, but of spirit. Every day had become a performance, a carefully orchestrated routine of smiling, caring, and pretending. Her radiant eyes, usually warm and inviting, now carried a subtle shadow of pain, a hint that something had broken deep inside. Kevin, her husband, the man she had trusted with her dreams, had betrayed her in a way that left no room for forgiveness, or so she told herself. Divorce papers had been signed weeks ago, each word a knife twisting in her gut. She had envisioned a family, a loving home filled with laughter and warmth, but all those dreams had crumbled under the weight of his betrayal. Every patient she attended seemed like a fleeting distraction, a placeholder for the life she had lost. The smiles she offered felt mechanical, devoid of the genuine joy that once came naturally. Even her pregnancy, the one bright light she had hoped to cling to, had become a source of silent anxiety. The tiny life growing inside her was a constant reminder of both love and loss, of a future she feared to hope for, and of a past that still haunted her. Her hands instinctively brushed her belly as she walked, feeling the faint flutters that seemed to pulse with both promise and worry. Each step sent subtle aches through her body, a reminder that she was fragile in ways she didn't yet admit to herself. Brian had noticed. Always observant, always quietly present, he had been watching her from a distance for weeks. Not in a stalkerish way, not in a way meant to intrude, but with the kind of attention that came from a man who could see beyond surface smiles and composed exteriors. Brian was a CEO doctor, wealthy, commanding, and undeniably handsome, but he also had a depth that most people never glimpsed. He noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted briefly to the floor before she could smile politely, the slight tremor in her hands when she handled medical charts. That day, she had seemed especially weary. Something in her gait, slower than usual, almost defeated, caught his eye as she passed the nurse's station. Her lab coat hung loosely around her figure, her posture slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. He watched silently from across the corridor as she tended to her last patient, her attention professional but distant, as if her mind were elsewhere. Brian's chest tightened with concern. He had sensed for weeks that Tina was hiding more than just fatigue, that behind her strength and competence, a storm raged unseen. As she collected her belongings, her movements brisk yet hesitant, he saw the subtle quiver in her lips when she thought no one was watching. Brian hesitated, conflicted between approaching her directly and respecting her apparent desire to be left alone. But something inside him urged him forward, a pull he could neither ignore nor rationalize. He followed quietly as she walked out of the hospital entrance, the evening sun casting long shadows that mirrored the heaviness in her heart. The streets were unusually empty that day, a strange calm settling over the city as if it sensed her turmoil. Tina's steps quickened unconsciously, a need to escape, to move away from the memories of betrayal and disappointment that clung to her like a second skin. She barely registered the sounds of traffic in the distance, the hum of neon lights, or the occasional pedestrian passing by. Her mind was a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts. The divorce papers, Kevin's cold expression as he left, the life she had hoped for and lost. Brian followed at a careful distance, his eyes never leaving her, noting each falter, each small gesture of pain. He wondered silently what had brought her to this state, what invisible burden she carried so heavily on her slender frame. His steps matched hers, quickening as her pace increased, instinctively feeling the urgency she refused to acknowledge. Something deep inside him whispered that he was too late, that if he didn't act soon, the consequences could be catastrophic. Tina paused suddenly at the edge of a quiet street, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. Her hand pressed instinctively to her belly, a sharp pang radiating through her abdomen. She swayed slightly, unsteady, her vision momentarily blurring as her chest tightened. Fear mingled with exhaustion, a sensation she had never allowed herself to feel in public. And then, almost imperceptibly, her knees buckled beneath her. Brian was instantly at her side, the distance between them disappearing in a heartbeat. He caught her before she could hit the ground, his strong arms supporting her trembling frame. "Tina," he whispered, his voice both commanding and gentle, a lifeline in the middle of her chaos. She leaned into him, barely able to form words, her tears flowing freely now, tracing the contours of her cheeks, mingling with the faint sweat of physical strain. Her sobs shook her entire body, each breath a struggle, each movement heavy with pain and emotion. Brian's eyes scanned her rapidly, noting her pallor, the faint trembling, the stress etched into every line of her face. He lifted her carefully, adjusting his hold to cradle her belly with utmost care, his instincts as a doctor kicking in alongside his growing concern for her emotional state. "Breathe. Just breathe," he murmured, his lips brushing her temple in a gesture meant to calm, to reassure, to anchor her in the present. Her fingers clutched at his coat, gripping it as if holding on to hope itself, while her mind spun with panic, grief, and an inexplicable sense of relief that someone, anyone, was finally there. As he guided her toward his car parked just ahead, Brian's attention was split between her physical condition and the rapid-fire questions racing through his mind. How long had she been suffering in silence? Why had no one noticed before? And most importantly, what was happening to her now that made her collapse like this in broad daylight? The city lights blurred past as they moved, the world shrinking to the space between them. Tina's pulse was erratic, her breaths shallow, but the warmth of his coat and the steady pressure of his hands on her back brought a sliver of calm. She dared not speak, the words caught in her throat, replaced by shaky gasps and the quiet sobs that had been building for months. Brian glanced at her from the corner of his eye, noting the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers clung to him, the vulnerability that contrasted so sharply with the strong, professional woman she appeared to be in the hospital. Something about her fragility ignited an urgent need to protect, to ensure nothing, no one, no circumstance would harm her again. Even in the silence of the car's interior, the air thick with tension and faint fragrance of her perfume mixed with antiseptic from the hospital, Brian could feel the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just a fainting spell. This was a breaking point, a fracture in a life that had endured too much pain. And he knew, with an almost instinctive certainty, that how he handled these next moments could change everything. Tina's trembling intensified, her belly contracting painfully, a realization dawning that made her cry out softly. Brian's hands tightened around her, adjusting to support her better. "It's okay. You're going to be fine." "I'm right here," he whispered, his voice steady, grounding her in the storm of pain and fear. A sudden sharp contraction stole her breath entirely, her body convulsing slightly in his arms. Brian's heart pounded with urgency. This wasn't just exhaustion or stress. Something more serious was happening, and he knew he had to act fast. The nearest hospital doors seemed impossibly far as the weight of responsibility pressed down on him, yet he moved with precision, determination, and an unwavering focus on her well-being. Tina's vision blurred further, the city lights blending into a whirl of color and shadow, but Brian's presence anchored her, a lifeline in the chaos. She pressed her face against his chest, tears soaking his coat, and whispered brokenly, I don't know if I can." "You can," Brian said firmly, his lips brushing her hair as he held her tighter. "I won't let anything happen. I promise I've got you." And then, just as the car engine roared to life, another sharp pain shot through her belly, more intense than before, a warning of the storm yet to fully come. Brian's jaw tightened. He knew in that moment that this was only the beginning, and nothing would ever be the same again. Tina's body shudders violently in Brian's arms, signaling that her labor may have begun far earlier than anyone expected, and the quiet street around them suddenly feels like a threshold to chaos, life, and a connection that neither of them could have anticipated. Tina's body hit the cold pavement with a heavy thud, her knees folding beneath her, and her trembling belly pressing uncomfortably against the unforgiving street. The night air bit into her skin, making her shiver involuntarily, while a hot trail of tears streamed down her cheeks. Panic surged through her, a tidal wave that left her breathless and disoriented. The world around her seemed to spin, each neon glow and distant car horn blurring into an indistinct haze. Her hands instinctively clutched at the coat she had grabbed from the hospital, as if trying to hold on to some semblance of control, but her strength had deserted her completely. Brian was instantly at her side, his hands wrapping around her with urgent tenderness. He knelt beside her, the city lights reflecting off his sharp features, his concern written plainly in the intensity of his gaze. "Tina," he whispered, his voice low but unwavering, carrying both command and reassurance. "You're safe. I won't let anything happen." His words, gentle yet firm, seemed to cut through the fog of despair clouding her mind, and she clung to him instinctively, her face pressed into his chest. Her sobs shook her entire body, each one racking her frame with violent intensity. The sound echoed faintly down the empty street, mingling with the soft hum of distant traffic. Each breath she drew felt shallow, almost painfully so, and her trembling hands pressed against her abdomen instinctively, as if protecting the life growing within her. Brian's heart tightened at the sight. He could see the fatigue etched into every line of her body, the way her usually radiant skin had paled slightly, and the tension in her shoulders that refused to relax even in his arms. His trained eyes scanned her quickly, assessing the signs that screamed urgency, the faint pulse racing erratically beneath his fingertips, the subtle but persistent contraction in her abdomen, and the exhaustion that weighed down her movements. He realized instantly that this was no ordinary collapse. The situation had escalated beyond mere fatigue. Danger was lurking in the shadows, and he had only moments to act. Without hesitation, he lifted her fully into his arms, his strength steady, careful to support her belly, as if cradling the most fragile treasure in the world. The weight of her small, delicate frame pressed against him, but he welcomed it, knowing that every second counted. He brushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead, his thumb gently caressing her temple as he murmured reassurances. "I've got you," he said again, as if repeating it would somehow anchor her in safety. Tina's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but only a faint whimper escaped. Her words caught in her throat, choked by fear and surprise. She had never experienced someone caring for her with such intensity, someone moving with precision and urgency while remaining tender. A strange mix of fear and relief coursed through her veins, leaving her heart pounding in a rhythm she could hardly comprehend. Brian's coat flared open as he adjusted his hold, pulling it snug around her shoulders to shield her from the chill in the air. The night felt colder than it should have, the empty street stretching out like an endless corridor of uncertainty. Yet in the cocoon of his arms, she felt the tiniest spark of safety, a fragile sense that maybe, just maybe, someone was there to protect her from everything she had feared. He carried her toward his car, parked a few yards away, moving with fluid precision, his eyes scanning the surrounding street for any sign of danger or passerby who might disrupt the delicate moment. Each step he took was measured, deliberate, and careful, mindful of her trembling frame and the precious life she carried. His chest pressed gently against her back as he walked, providing a stability she desperately clung to, even without consciously realizing it. Tina's head lolled slightly against his shoulder, tears still streaming freely, but her sobs had lessened ever so slightly. The first waves of panic had begun to ebb, replaced by the awe of being cradled, guided, and protected. Yet every small jolt from the uneven pavement sent shocks of pain through her abdomen, causing her to gasp sharply and clutch instinctively at Brian's coat. He reached the car quickly, opening the rear door with one fluid motion while keeping her body supported with unyielding care. Carefully, he lowered her into the seat, making sure her belly was safe, that her back was supported, and that her trembling legs had room to relax. The warmth of the car's interior offered immediate relief, a stark contrast to the chill of the street, but the urgency in Brian's expression reminded her that danger was still very real, very immediate. He closed the door gently, his eyes locking on hers with an intensity that made her heart flutter and her breath catch. "We're going to the hospital now. You're going to be okay. Just focus on me, on breathing, on staying calm," he said, his voice steady but imbued with urgency. She nodded weakly, the words barely forming, her gaze locked on the strong, protective presence before her. The city lights outside the car window blurred as Brian started the engine. The car hummed to life, but each second seemed to stretch endlessly, a mix of hope and dread pressing on both their hearts. Tina's fingers gripped the edge of the seat, knuckles white, as another sharp contraction racked her body. She gasped, a loud, painful sound that made her cheeks flush with both fear and exertion. Brian's hands immediately went to her belly, gently pressing and supporting, murmuring reassurances while guiding her through each wave of pain. "It's okay. You're doing great. Breathe with me," he coached, matching his breath to hers, providing a rhythm she could follow when her own body rebelled against her. The intensity of the contraction caused her to shiver violently, her teeth chattering slightly as the cold seeped into her bones, mingling with the heat of panic. Her head fell against his shoulder, and for a moment silence filled the car, except for the soft hum of the engine and the labored sound of her breathing. Brian's mind raced, calculating distance, time, and urgency. He knew that any delay could prove catastrophic. Each second mattered. He adjusted his grip, supporting both her and the life she carried with meticulous care. Tina's thoughts swirled chaotically, caught between fear of her body failing her and amazement at the stranger who had become her anchor. She had never felt this kind of presence before, someone who acted with authority and tenderness simultaneously, someone who didn't panic even as her world trembled. Yet the intensity of the moment made her heart race uncontrollably, the flutters in her belly now joined by waves of panic she could barely control. Another contraction hit, sharper than the last, leaving her gasping loudly. Brian instinctively pressed his hand over hers, their fingers entwining for a fleeting moment, a touch that offered reassurance without words. The movement made her flinch slightly, but the warmth of his hand grounded her, anchoring her to something solid in the chaos of her body's betrayal. The car sped through the city streets, the lights streaking past in long lines, as if time itself had stretched. Each turn, each bump, Each minor jolt sent shocks through Tina's abdomen, causing her to wince and clutch instinctively at her belly. Brian's eyes flicked constantly between the road and her, his mind calculating the fastest route to the hospital while ensuring her safety with every movement. Tina tried to speak again, but her voice was lost to the tremors of pain and fear. Her chest heaved, tears still flowing freely, and for the first time she felt completely and utterly exposed, vulnerable in ways she had never allowed herself to be before. Brian's presence, strong, commanding yet tender, made her feel simultaneously safe and dangerously aware of the intensity growing between them. He reached for a soft blanket in the back seat, draping it carefully over her shoulders, the warmth spreading slowly but soothingly through her shivering body. The subtle scent of the blanket mixed with her perfume and the sterile hints of the hospital nearby, a strange comfort in the storm of fear surrounding her. Each contraction grew in intensity, more urgent, more insistent, a stark reminder that the time to reach medical help was now, that her life and her child's life depended on every careful, precise second. Tina's hands shook violently as she pressed them against her belly, tears streaming freely, her breath ragged and uneven. Brian's voice never wavered. He guided her, comforted her, and reassured her with every contraction, every sob, every gasp. "We're almost there. You're doing so well. Just a little more," he murmured, his fingers brushing her hair back from her sweat-dampened face, a tender touch in a moment of chaos. Her eyes met his, wide with fear and awe. She had never expected anyone to care this much, to move with such urgency while remaining so calm. Her pulse raced, her body shook, yet she clung to him instinctively, trusting him in a way that made her shiver in both fear and anticipation. Another violent contraction seizes her in the car, sharper than before, leaving Brian to realize with a jolt that her labor has begun far earlier than anyone expected, and the hospital is still minutes away. The hospital doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the harsh, sterile light that flickered down the hallway, bathing everything in a cold, clinical glow. Tina's body shook violently as Brian carried her through the entrance, the echoes of her ragged breaths and sharp gasps reverberating faintly against the sterile walls. Nurses and staff immediately took notice, their expressions sharp with urgency as they sprang into action. Yet Brian remained the calm eye of the storm, guiding each movement with precision. He adjusted her position gently in his arms, ensuring her fragile belly remained supported, and whispered, "Almost there, just a little further." "You're doing so well." Tina's head lolled slightly, resting against his chest, the warmth of his body grounding her in the chaos of pain and fear. Each contraction hit her like a thunderclap, a sharp, relentless reminder of how vulnerable she truly was. She clutched at his coat instinctively, nails digging into the fabric, seeking some semblance of control in the maelstrom of agony consuming her. The corridor seemed impossibly long, each step Brian took deliberate, unwavering, a silent promise that he would not let her fall. Not now, not ever. The sound of her own breaths, ragged and uneven, mixed with the soft beeping of machines and distant voices of nurses moving quickly through the halls. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every pulse a stark reminder of the fragile life within her. Brian's hands pressed gently against her back, massaging, supporting, whispering encouragements that wrapped around her like a shield. "Breathe, Tina. Focus on me. Focus on Alex. We're almost there." Her eyes, glistening with tears, met his, wide with fear and awe. She had never known a presence so steady, so commanding yet tender, so entirely devoted. Her body convulsed with another contraction, sharper, more insistent, and she gasped loudly, clenching instinctively to the warmth of his coat. Brian's heart thudded with urgency, but his hands remained precise, each movement measured to avoid causing additional pain. The hospital staff moved in a synchronized dance around them, nurses adjusting IVs, checking monitors, preparing the room for imminent labor, but Brian's focus never wavered from Tina. He guided her to the gurney, supporting her every step as her legs trembled violently beneath her. The staff murmured instructions, but it was his voice, calm and steady, that seemed to anchor her in the chaos. "Lean on me," he urged, his lips brushing her hair back. "You're stronger than you think, Tina. You can do this." The gurney wheels clicked against the tile floor as they moved swiftly through the hallway, a path illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. Tina's mind swirled, torn between pain, fear, and the surreal sensation of being cared for so completely by someone she barely knew. She shivered against him, body shaking from both exhaustion and the relentless waves of contractions that racked her. Brian adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, tucking it snugly as he guided her into the labor room. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils, a harsh contrast to the warmth radiating from him. She felt her chest tighten with panic, but his strong hands on her arms and his eyes locked on hers offered a lifeline she clung to desperately. "It's okay," he murmured. "I'm right here. I won't let go." Once on the bed, he supported her fully, his hands steady, warm, and unwavering. Nurses moved around them, setting up monitors, preparing instruments, but Brian's focus remained singular. Tina and the tiny life she carried. Every flicker of her eyes, every tremor, every shallow breath spoke volumes of the intensity of this moment, and he responded with calculated care. Hours passed in a haze of agonizing labor, each second stretching endlessly. Tina's body quivered with fatigue, sweat glistening on her brow, tears mixing with the remnants of her mascara as contractions came in relentless succession. Her back arched instinctively, nails digging into the mattress, and Brian's hands pressed firmly against her lower back, his thumbs massaging in rhythm with the contractions. "You're doing beautifully, Tina," he whispered, his voice low but penetrating, carrying authority, warmth, and a fierce protective instinct all at once. Her vision blurred with tears, the sterile lights above flickering as though responding to the rhythm of her pain. Each gasp was met with his soft reassurance, each tremble soothed with a careful touch. "Almost there. I'm right here. Breathe through it. You're stronger than you realize," he murmured, guiding her breaths, synchronizing with her in a way that made her feel grounded despite the storm of agony coursing through her. Another sharp contraction seized her, leaving her gasping uncontrollably. Brian's hands pressed to her belly, carefully applying pressure, whispering, "You can do this. Focus. Focus. I've got you." The room seemed to shrink around her, the monitor's beeps fading into the background as her entire world narrowed to the warmth of his hands, the intensity of the pain, and the life within her. Minutes stretched like hours as the labor continued, each wave of pain breaking over her like a tidal force. She felt her body trembling uncontrollably, her pulse racing and her breathing shallow. Brian never faltered, never hesitated, adjusting his hands, whispering encouragement, and maintaining a steady gaze that tethered her to hope. "That's it. You're doing amazing. One more push." The nurse called out instructions, but Brian's voice was the anchor she clung to, stronger than any professional command, deeper than any fear. He guided her hands, supported her back, and whispered words of reassurance that pierced through her pain. "I'm right here, Tina. I've got you. Focus on Alex. Focus on this moment. You're going to meet him soon." And then, finally, the moment arrived. A tiny cry echoed in the room, shattering the tension and filling the sterile space with life. Alex had entered the world, his tiny fists curling instinctively, his cry sharp, strong, and vibrant, a testament to survival, resilience, and hope. Brian's hands, careful and reverent, lifted the infant, holding him close as he assessed the tiny body with awe. Tina, weak, trembling, and utterly exhausted, leaned back against the pillows, tears flowing freely as she stared at her son. Gratitude and relief washed over her in overwhelming waves, mixing with disbelief that this little life had arrived safely against all the fear and struggle of the hours prior. She whispered softly, voice barely audible, "Alex, my baby." Brian's eyes softened as he gazed at the infant, then back to Tina, a depth of emotion and unspoken affection shining through his gaze. He lowered his voice to a tender whisper, meant for her alone. "You're mine now, and this little one too." Her heart trembled, caught between disbelief, fragile hope, and the stirrings of a connection that felt forbidden, yet inevitable. The room was quiet now, except for the faint beeping of monitors, the soft cries of Alex, and Tina's shallow breaths. Brian remained at her side, unwavering, a steady presence in a world that had felt so chaotic just hours ago. His hands rested lightly on hers, intertwining fingers in a silent promise, his gaze holding hers with something deeper than care, something raw, dangerous, and magnetic. As Tina reached out, weak and trembling, to touch her son's tiny hand, Brian's gaze locked on hers, and she felt the undercurrent of desire and passion simmering just beneath his calm, protective exterior, a dangerous flame threatening to ignite at any moment. 4. Brian gently lifted Tina from the hospital bed, his hands steady, careful, and unyielding, as though cradling something far more precious than even life itself. Her small frame trembled against him, weak from labor, yet a fragile spark of relief glimmered in her eyes. Alex, swaddled carefully in a soft blanket, rested in Brian's other arm, his tiny fists curling instinctively. The soft weight of the infant against Brian's chest mirrored the delicate responsibility he carried for both mother and child, and a rare softness flickered across his usually commanding features. The hospital staff watched silently, knowing that Brian's authority in the room extended beyond the walls of any hospital. His presence demanded respect. Nurses whispered instructions to one another, checking monitors and adjusting IVS, but Brian moved with the fluid grace of someone who commanded both attention and reverence. Tina, exhausted and barely able to lift her eyelids, clung to his coat, feeling the warmth and strength radiating from him. For the first time in months, she sensed safety, a haven where fear could not reach her. As Brian guided them toward his sleek black vehicle waiting outside, Tina's mind swirled with disbelief. The world outside the hospital felt cold, distant, and almost unreal, compared to the warmth radiating from the man who now held her and her newborn son. Every step he took was deliberate, calculated to avoid jostling her fragile body, and yet each step carried an unspoken message. "You are mine, and I will not let you fall." The car ride to the mansion was smooth, the leather interior comforting against her still tender body. Brian adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, his fingers brushing the sweat-dampened strands of hair from her face. "Relax, Tina. Just breathe," he murmured, his voice low, commanding, and yet infused with something tender that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of his breathing and the steady hum of the engine anchor her in a fleeting sense of peace. Minutes later, the gates of his estate opened, revealing a world of luxury Tina had only dreamed of in her wildest imaginings. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes framed expansive windows, and the air carried a subtle, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and fresh flowers. Servants appeared discreetly, their movements silent, graceful, and precise, each anticipating her needs before she could even voice them. Alex's tiny fingers curled around her own as Brian carried them inside, the infant's gentle coos echoing softly through the vast hallways. Brian carefully lowered Tina onto a plush chaise in the master suite, his hands never leaving hers, supporting her fragile frame as though she were spun from the most delicate porcelain. "You're safe here," he murmured again, his eyes lingering on her face, taking in the faint sheen of sweat, the delicate arch of her brows, and the tears still clinging to her lashes. She swallowed against the lump in her throat, her chest tightening with an emotion she had long thought buried, awe, gratitude, and an unsettling stir of attraction. The days that followed blurred into a gentle rhythm of care and healing. Servants moved quietly in the background, ensuring Alex was fed, changed, and comforted. Meals appeared in delicate trays, perfectly balanced in taste and nutrition. Brian remained close at hand, attending to Tina's every need with a patience that bordered on obsession. He would brush her hair back, adjust her pillow, or simply sit beside her, his presence a quiet anchor in the vastness of the mansion. Each soft glance or casual touch carried weight, a subtle message that she was no longer alone in the world. Tina's body healed slowly, the aches of pregnancy and labor lingering like ghosts that refused to leave. Yet her heart, once heavy with despair and betrayal, began to thaw more rapidly than she expected. Each gesture of care from Brian chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. She caught herself watching him as he moved through the house, his quiet power evident in every action. The way he walked, confident, assured, yet mindful of her and Alex, made her pulse race in ways she hadn't anticipated. Nights were long, filled with whispered conversations, the soft rustle of blankets and gentle touches that lingered just a moment too long to be merely polite. Tina found herself smiling again, a rare light returning to her eyes, and the sound of Alex's laughter became the melody that threaded through each day. Yet, in the quiet of these intimate moments, shadows of her past sometimes crept in, whispering doubts she fought to ignore. Memories of Kevin's betrayal lingered at the edge of her mind, threatening to shatter the fragile peace she was beginning to feel. Brian's gaze, however, never wavered. He watched her as she moved about the room, the tender strength in her posture, the subtle smiles she reserved for Alex, and even the moments when she was lost in thought. There was a heat in his eyes that she had not seen before, an intensity that spoke of desire carefully restrained yet impossible to conceal. On several occasions, she caught him lingering a moment too long by the doorway or watching her while she cradled Alex, his expression unreadable yet undeniably magnetic. Tina's own feelings began to shift subtly, the walls around her heart weakening as she observed Brian's unwavering devotion. She felt warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of longing she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge in months. Yet fear tempered her desire. She was acutely aware of the fragility of love after betrayal, of the possibility that this too could end in pain. Each time Brian's gaze lingered on her, her pulse quickened dangerously, a silent warning that she was treading on dangerous emotional ground. Even in the safety of luxury, the mansion itself seemed to whisper reminders of her newfound vulnerability. The soft hum of the lighting, the faint echoes in the marble hallways, and the quiet movements of unseen staff created a cocoon where intimacy and tension intermingled. Tina caught herself wondering if she could ever feel this safe with anyone again, or if the vulnerability required for love was a luxury she no longer deserved. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky flushed with orange and pink, Tina sat by the grand window, cradling Alex in her arms. Brian stood across the room, seemingly absorbed in the details of a file, yet she could feel his gaze upon her like a physical presence. When she glanced up, their eyes met, and the heat in his stare made her chest flutter and her fingers tighten instinctively on the baby. A shiver ran down her spine, not from cold, but from the dangerous magnetic intensity that simmered between them. Brian crossed the room in a few silent, measured strides, seating himself beside her. His hand brushed hers, lingering too long, and she felt her pulse spike. His voice was low, steady, yet threaded with emotion she couldn't entirely decipher. "You're healing beautifully, Tina. Stronger than you realize," he said softly, his thumb tracing idle patterns on her hand. Tina's heart raced at the gentle pressure of his touch, the quiet authority in his tone, and the subtle intimacy of the moment. She wanted to pull away to protect her fragile heart, yet a part of her ached to lean closer, to feel the strength of him enveloping her entirely. The mansion, the luxury, the safety. It all felt like a world she had stepped into by fate, yet the depth of desire and unspoken connection between them made it feel almost perilous. As she looked into his eyes, Tina realized something startling. She was developing feelings for Brian, feelings that terrified her, because her heart was fragile, scarred by betrayal, and yet inexplicably drawn to him. The warmth in his gaze hinted at something more than care, a dangerous, unspoken desire that threatened to ignite at any moment. She tightened her hold on Alex, fighting the fluttering panic in her chest, knowing that giving in to this growing attraction could change everything. The mansion was quiet that evening, the soft glow of ambient lighting reflecting off polished marble floors, casting delicate shadows across the expansive halls. Tina wandered slowly toward the terrace, her fingers lightly brushing the banister as if seeking comfort in its cold solidity. She cradled a steaming cup of tea, inhaling its fragrant warmth, yet her mind was anything but calm. Thoughts of Brian swirled in her head, unbidden and insistent, mixing gratitude for his care with a dangerous flutter of attraction that made her pulse quicken. Each memory of his gentle touches, his watchful gaze, and his unwavering presence tugged at her heart, stirring emotions she had long buried beneath layers of fear and past betrayal. Brian noticed her absence from the main living area, her silence a signal that drew him instinctively to her. He followed quietly, his footsteps muffled against the thick carpet, each movement deliberate and unintrusive. When he reached the terrace, he paused just inside the doorway, observing her from a distance. Tina stood near the railing, gazing at the city lights that shimmered like tiny stars below. Her eyes were moist, reflecting both the glittering city and the storm of emotions within her. He could see the subtle trembling of her hands as she held the cup, the faint tension in her shoulders, and the way her lips pressed together, as if holding back words she couldn't yet speak. Careful not to startle her, Brian stepped closer, his presence quiet but commanding. He rested one hand lightly on the railing beside her, a few inches from where she leaned, creating an invisible bridge of safety between them. "You're thinking too much," he said softly, his voice low, rich and imbued with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Tina turned slightly, her eyes meeting his, and felt the familiar warmth and intensity that always accompanied his gaze. It was a gaze that demanded attention, that coaxed the truth from hidden corners of her heart without uttering a single harsh word. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to speak, to voice the jumble of gratitude, fear and longing swirling inside her, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she leaned just slightly against the railing, letting the cool metal anchor her, and whispered, It's hard to believe anyone could care so much after everything." Her voice trembled, carrying both vulnerability and a hesitant hope she hadn't dared allow herself in months. Brian's hand shifted, brushing against hers ever so lightly as he stepped closer. The contact was brief, yet it sent a jolt through her body, a current of warmth and something deeper she could not name. "I don't care about your past, Tina," he said gently, his gaze locking with hers. "I care about you, about Alex, about the life we can have together. You don't have to carry it all alone anymore." His words wrapped around her like a protective cocoon, yet beneath them simmered a tension, a magnetic pull that made her knees threaten to buckle. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, seeing the sincerity etched into every line of his face, the quiet strength in his posture, and the unspoken promise in his eyes. Every care he had shown, every small gesture, every thoughtful detail for Alex, all of it now coalesced into a force too powerful to ignore. Her chest tightened as she felt the dangerous mixture of comfort, longing, and desire that Brian always seemed to stir effortlessly. The wind from the terrace stirred her hair, brushing against her cheek, and Brian reached up instinctively to tuck a stray strand behind her ear. The simple gesture caused her heart to leap, a heady mix of embarrassment and longing coursing through her. "You belong here, with me and Alex," he whispered, his voice close enough to tickle her ear, warm and steady and undeniably intimate. Tina's breath caught. The words, soft and deliberate, struck a chord deep within her, unraveling a knot of fear she had carried for months. She felt warmth spreading through her chest, a delicate heat mingling with relief, trust, and an unexpected longing. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to lean into him, to feel the safety, the care, and the undeniable pull of attraction that had been building since the day he had rescued her. Her lips parted slightly, a fragile invitation, and she felt her heartbeat racing in rhythm with the quiet, magnetic energy between them. Yet even in this moment of intimacy, the shadows of her past lingered at the edge of her mind. Memories of Kevin, of betrayal and heartbreak, whispered caution in her ears, warning her not to surrender too quickly, not to trust too fully. She hesitated, the air thick with tension, torn between desire and the lingering fear that opening her heart could lead to pain once more. Brian sensed her hesitation, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders, the slight pullback in her posture. He didn't push, didn't attempt to bridge the remaining distance too quickly. Instead, he maintained his presence, his hand still near hers, his voice soft and steady. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured. "I'll wait as long as you need. But don't doubt that I want you here, with me, completely." His words hung in the air, a gentle promise, yet the intensity in his gaze made her aware of the unspoken desire simmering just beneath the surface. Tina's mind spun with conflicting thoughts. She wanted to close the distance, to feel the warmth of his body, to taste the reassurance in his lips. But fear, lingering and insistent, kept her rooted. She shifted slightly, the edge of the terrace railing biting into her palms, grounding her while her pulse raced uncontrollably. The city lights below blurred as she stared into Brian's eyes, seeing both the tenderness and the fire that simmered within him. Then, without warning, a flicker of movement caught her eye at the edge of the terrace, a shadow moving just beyond the safety of the light. Her body froze, and the momentary closeness she had allowed evaporated instantly. Brian noticed the sudden tension in her posture, the sharp intake of her breath, and his protective instincts flared. He stepped slightly in front of her, placing a hand lightly on her back, shielding her from whatever threat lingered in the darkness. Tina's eyes darted toward the shadow again, her heart hammering. The intimacy of the moment was shattered, replaced by a creeping unease. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and curiosity. Brian followed her gaze, his expression hardening as he scanned the terrace edges, every muscle tensed and ready. Whoever, or whatever, was watching, he knew instinctively it wasn't random. The wind shifted, rustling leaves and carrying faint sounds from beyond the terrace. Tina's grip on the railing tightened, and she instinctively stepped closer to Brian, seeking both reassurance and protection. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining, yet the brush of their touch was brief and tense, shadowed by the sudden intrusion. A soft, deliberate cough echoed from the terrace edge, almost imperceptible, yet enough to make Tina's heart leap. She froze, eyes wide, as the shadow moved again, revealing the silhouette of a figure she hadn't expected. Someone from her past, someone whose presence carried secrets, threats, and a revelation that could change everything she had begun to build with Brian. 6 months had passed since that night on the terrace, a night that had left Tina shaken yet undeniably aware of the magnetic, protective intensity that Brian carried with him. The mansion, once a place of cautious comfort, had become a sanctuary where she began to rebuild not only her life, but her heart. Alex grew each day, his laughter echoing through the halls like a symphony of hope, a constant reminder of the life she had survived and the love that now surrounded her. Yet, even amidst the warmth and luxury, Tina could feel the lingering tension of her past, a subtle shadow that clung stubbornly to her joy. Every glance she shared with Brian carried the unspoken acknowledgement that love was fragile, that happiness could be threatened in a heartbeat. Brian, ever attentive, noticed the faint traces of unease in her expressions, the occasional hesitation in her smile, and the guarded way she sometimes glanced at doors or windows. He had grown increasingly aware that while he could shield her physically, her heart required patience, tenderness, and unwavering proof that she was safe to trust again. So he devised a plan, one that combined thoughtfulness, romance, and a hint of playful suspense. He chose the very hospital where he had first found her collapsed in despair, the place where their lives had intersected in a way that neither could ever forget. The irony of proposing there was not lost on him. What had once been a site of vulnerability would now become a monument of love and commitment. Weeks of preparation preceded the evening. Candles were placed meticulously along the corridors, their soft flames casting flickering shadows that danced across the sterile walls, transforming the hospital into a scene both magical and intimate. Soft music, carefully selected by Brian, floated through hidden speakers, carrying melodies that whispered of hope, healing, and the promise of new beginnings. Nurses and staff, discreetly in on the secret, moved quietly, ensuring that nothing would interrupt the carefully choreographed moment. Alex, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the event, babbled and giggled, his tiny hands reaching for the flames of candles from a safe distance, his laughter weaving through the music and shadows like a delicate thread of pure innocence. Tina arrived, her heart already fluttering with curiosity and apprehension. The hallway she had once hurried down in despair now glimmered with warmth and possibility. She felt the familiar rush of nervous anticipation that accompanies moments that can change one's life forever. The gentle aroma of fresh flowers mingled with the faint antiseptic scent of the hospital, grounding her yet heightening the surreal beauty of the scene. She spotted Brian at the far end of the corridor, his posture steady, his eyes reflecting the same unwavering care and intensity she had come to rely on, and a rush of emotion swept over her. He knelt before her, the soft candlelight illuminating his handsome features, the depth of his gaze capturing all the love, respect, and unspoken promises he had felt since the day he first carried her into his care. His hand extended to hers, fingers brushing lightly against hers, sending a spark through her chest that left her breathless. "Tina," he began, his voice low, steady, and infused with profound sincerity. "From the moment I found you, I knew my life would never be the same. You and Alex have become my world, my heart, my reason. Will you marry me? Will you be mine forever?" The words wrapped around her heart like a warm embrace, tender yet commanding, impossible to resist. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as her chest tightened with emotion. Every ounce of fear, hesitation, and doubt that had haunted her over the past months seemed to dissolve under the weight of his unwavering devotion. She whispered yes, her voice trembling with joy and relief, allowing herself finally to accept love without fear, without hesitation, and without reservation. Brian's hand tightened over hers as he rose, drawing her close, and the world seemed to shrink until there was nothing left but their shared heartbeat and the soft, magical glow surrounding them. Preparations for the wedding followed swiftly, blending intimacy with grandeur in a way that mirrored their unique journey. The ceremony was held in the mansion, adorned with crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and hundreds of candles that flickered gently, reflecting off polished surfaces to create a dreamlike atmosphere. Family, friends, and close colleagues attended, but the focus remained unwaveringly on Tina and Brian. Laughter, whispered congratulations, and tender glances filled the air as vows were exchanged, each word carrying the weight of their journey from despair to trust, from fear to desire. Alex sat between them, his tiny hands occasionally clapping with innocent delight, a living reminder of the love that had brought them together. The night of their wedding arrived, and with it, a passionate intimacy that transcended the ordinary. The soft glow of the mansion lights created a cocoon of privacy as Tina and Brian shared their first night as husband and wife. Their bodies intertwined with a tenderness that spoke of months of longing, care, and emotional vulnerability. Every touch, kiss, and whispered word conveyed more than physical passion. It was a dialogue of hearts, an affirmation of trust, and a celebration of the love they had nurtured against all odds. Tina felt the chains of her past shatter completely, replaced by warmth, desire, and a deep, consuming passion that left her breathless and fulfilled. Yet even in the ecstasy of union, a subtle tension lingered at the edges of their bliss. The memory of Kevin, the betrayal she had endured, and the shadows of uncertainty reminded Tina that happiness was precious precisely because it was fragile. She nestled against Brian, his heartbeat steadying her own, and allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, realizing that while the night was theirs, the world beyond the mansion gates still held uncertainties, challenges, and unforeseen intrusions. Brian held her close, whispering soft reassurances and promises, yet his eyes flicked occasionally toward the terrace window, toward the doors, as if sensing an invisible presence beyond their private haven. He did not speak, but the tension in his gaze was enough for Tina to feel it, a quiet reminder that love, while powerful, always exists alongside vulnerability. As they lay entwined, the mansion quiet except for the soft hum of the city below, a knock at the mansion's main door shattered the tranquility. Tina's heart skipped, Alex stirred slightly in his crib, and Brian's protective instincts surged instantly. The unexpected visitor, arriving without warning, carried the weight of Tina's past, the potential to disrupt everything they had built, and a revelation that neither she nor Brian could have anticipated. 7. The mansion was unusually quiet that evening, the soft hum of the city below providing a distant soundtrack to the intimacy and calm that Tina and Brian had just shared. Candles still flickered faintly in the main hall, their warm glow reflecting off polished floors and crystal fixtures, bathing the room in a serene, almost magical light. Tina, wrapped in a soft silk robe, carried Alex in her arms, his tiny body warm and comforting against her chest. The events of the night, the proposal, the wedding, and the passionate closeness still lingered in her mind like a vivid dream she never wanted to end. She felt safe, loved, and cherished in a way that her past had never allowed. Brian lingered behind her, close but not intrusive, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, grounding her while allowing her space to breathe. His presence radiated quiet strength, a reassuring barrier between her and the world outside. Yet even as peace settled in, a faint prickle of unease brushed along her senses, a whisper that warned her that life's trials were never truly over. She tried to dismiss it, focusing instead on Alex's gentle coos and the soft rhythmic rise and fall of his tiny chest. Then, without warning, the sharp chime of the mansion's main doorbell shattered the quiet, sending a ripple of tension through the room. Tina's heart jumped, her grip on Alex tightening instinctively. Who could that be at this hour? She murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, though the unease it carried was palpable. Brian's gaze immediately hardened, his instincts kicking in as he straightened, a silent warning flashing in his eyes. He moved toward the door with controlled urgency, each step measured yet forceful, radiating authority that would make anyone hesitate. "Stay here," he said softly, his hand brushing Tina's arm, grounding her while signaling that he would handle whatever waited outside. Yet Tina's mind raced, curiosity and dread intertwining as she followed him slowly, unwilling to leave the mystery entirely in shadow. When Brian opened the door, the figure standing there froze the air in the mansion, a stark contrast to the soft warmth inside. Kevin, Tina's ex-husband, stood there, his posture initially composed, but with a flicker of surprise and uncertainty crossing his features. He had not expected to find Tina radiant, confident, and utterly transformed from the woman he had once controlled, belittled, and betrayed. His eyes, scanning the opulent interior, settled on Tina first, and then on Brian standing firmly behind her, a living, imposing shield that radiated dominance and unyielding protection. "Tina," Kevin began, his voice strained as if rehearsed words failed to find their usual impact. He stepped closer, tentative, as if unsure how to navigate the new dynamic he was confronting. His arrogance faltered as he realized that the woman who once cowered under his presence now held herself with quiet authority, radiating a power that drew strength from love, security, and self-assuredness. Tina lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his with a clarity and firmness that made her own heart swell with newfound empowerment. "Leave," she said, her voice steady and unwavering, echoing with authority throughout the luxurious hall. It was a command, not a plea, and it carried with it the weight of someone who had reclaimed their life, their dignity, and their choices. Kevin faltered, shocked by the unrecognizable strength in her tone. He attempted to speak, to argue, to manipulate, his voice rising slightly as he tried to coax the old Tina, the frightened, obedient woman, back from the past. "Tina, you can't just... We can..." he stammered, his confidence cracking with every word. But the sight of her, serene yet radiant, with Brian standing behind her as a silent yet unmistakable protector, shattered every thread of arrogance he thought he possessed. The contrast between who she had been and who she had become hit him like a blow he wasn't prepared to absorb. Brian stepped forward slightly, his presence magnetic and commanding, a living barrier between Kevin and Tina. His eyes were cold, unyielding, and dangerous, yet carried the subtle warmth reserved solely for Tina. The intensity of his gaze was enough to unnerve Kevin completely, making him hesitate as he realized that any attempt to assert control would be met not just with resistance, but with consequences he could not anticipate. Tina felt a surge of power coursing through her veins, a fierce, intoxicating realization that her past no longer dictated her present. She was secure, adored, and untouchable in the sphere Brian had helped her create. Her hands rested lightly on Alex's back, a subtle gesture that reminded both men of the family bond that now protected her. She stared Kevin down, unwavering, her lips pressed firmly, eyes sharp and heart steady. Her love for Brian was not just apparent, it was unshakable, fierce, and protective. Kevin's face paled slightly as he took in the tableau. The confident, radiant woman he had tried to control, the tiny child who symbolized love and continuity, and the man whose presence was both intimidating and undeniably magnetic. He had come expecting to assert power, to stir chaos, yet found himself powerless against the unity and strength he now confronted. He swallowed hard, his pride cracking under the weight of reality. Finally, after a tense, lingering silence, Kevin stepped back, his shoulders slumping in defeat and humiliation. His gaze lingered briefly on Tina, a mixture of disbelief and a begrudging respect flickering in his eyes, but the moment was fleeting. He turned and left, the sound of his footsteps echoing faintly in the hallway before, fading into the night, leaving behind a mansion filled with quiet triumph and relief. Tina exhaled slowly, the adrenaline ebbing from her system, leaving her heart pounding with both victory and lingering fear. She looked to Brian, who had remained by her side, calm yet vigilant, his protective hand now gently resting on her shoulder. A smile flickered across her lips, small but genuine, as she realized she had finally reclaimed not only her life, but her autonomy, her dignity, and her peace. As she carried Alex back to his room, tucking him safely into his crib, Tina allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. The past had tried to define her, the pain had threatened to consume her, but she had emerged triumphant, supported by the unwavering love and care of Brian. Her heart felt full, her mind clear, and her body relaxed, yet a tiny flicker of curiosity and anticipation stirred within her. As Tina settled onto the sofa, a soft wave of nausea rolled over her, a subtle but undeniable sensation that left her hand instinctively resting on her lower abdomen. She paused, her mind racing. Could it be another life? Another child? A new chapter that would alter their family forever? The thought both thrilled and terrified her, leaving her breathless as she realized that even in the midst of reclaimed happiness, the story of her life and her heart was far from over. 8. The days after Kevin's humiliating departure felt like a fresh dawn for Tina, a time when she could finally breathe freely and savor the love that now enveloped her life. Brian's presence was constant yet gentle, a reassuring rhythm that underscored every action she took. Each morning, the sun's light filtered softly through the grand windows of the mansion, spilling across polished floors and plush furnishings, casting a warm glow over the small family that now defined Tina's world. Alex's laughter rang through the halls as he chased the family dog, oblivious to the heavy burdens of the past, his innocence a bright beacon that reminded Tina of everything she had fought for and won. The news of her second pregnancy had arrived on a quiet Sunday morning, an unexpected flutter in her stomach that left her hands instinctively cradling the new life growing inside her. At first, disbelief and fear clashed with joy, but Brian's calm and unwavering excitement quickly settled her trembling heart. He had held her hand through every doctor's appointment, every anxious heartbeat, every small discomfort that accompanied the early weeks. Each time he looked at her, his gaze was filled with wonder and adoration, the kind that made her feel seen in a way she had never known before. Brian's attentiveness grew even more pronounced with this pregnancy, his gestures of care both tender and meticulous. He would wake in the middle of the night to ensure Tina was comfortable, adjusting pillows and running a bath if she complained of aching muscles. Breakfasts were carefully prepared, nutrient-rich and designed to meet the unique needs of her changing body. And yet, beyond the physical care, it was his emotional presence that struck her the most. Quiet reassurance in the middle of overwhelming uncertainty, gentle words whispered in moments of doubt, and the soft laughter they shared as they imagined Alex's reaction to having a baby sibling. Evenings became their sanctuary, a time when the mansion softened into a space of shared dreams and whispered plans. Tina and Brian spent hours choosing colors for the nursery, debating the merits of soft pastels versus vibrant tones, imagining the toys, the crib, and the first small outfit the new baby would wear. Alex, ever curious and eager to participate, offered his own suggestions with the seriousness of a child who understood more than his years could express. His excitement was contagious, filling the house with a joy that even Tina's cautious heart could not resist. Tina's own reflection in the large bedroom mirror was startling in its beauty and strength. She traced the gentle curve of her belly, a living testament to resilience, love, and the promise of a brighter future. Her skin glowed with health and warmth, and her eyes, once shadowed by betrayal, now shimmered with hope and serenity. She had survived heartbreak, humiliation, and fear, and now she was thriving in a life built on love, trust, and unwavering devotion. Yet, despite the security, her instincts remained sharp, the lessons of the past whispering quietly that life's joy was often accompanied by unforeseen challenges. Brian's eyes caught her reflection as she stood lost in thought, his gaze softening as he stepped closer. "You're breathtaking," he murmured, his hand resting lightly on her hip, warm and grounding. Tina felt a shiver of warmth run through her, the simple affirmation of beauty and love, igniting a flutter of excitement and vulnerability. His hands lingered, tracing gentle patterns over the curve of her belly, as if both grounding her and connecting with the new life that had begun to intertwine with theirs. "Our family is growing," he whispered, his lips brushing her temple, sending her heart into a delicate, unsteady rhythm. Days blended into nights, each moment punctuated by small, perfect joys. Tina felt Alex's tiny hand grip hers as they read bedtime stories, her belly growing steadily as her body prepared to welcome the new addition. Brian, meanwhile, transformed the nursery with meticulous care, painting walls, assembling cribs, hanging mobiles, and arranging soft lighting. Each choice was deliberate, reflecting a man who not only adored his family, but wished to create a space of absolute safety and comfort for them. Yet even amidst the laughter, warmth, and anticipation, there were moments that reminded Tina of life's fragility. A sudden wave of dizziness while preparing a snack, a brief tightening in her stomach during a quiet morning, or an unexpected pang of fatigue sent flickers of anxiety through her mind. She would glance at Brian, who immediately responded with concern, his hands steadying her, his gaze scanning for any sign of real danger. Each incident, small though it might seem, was a reminder that life, love, and joy were precious, and that vigilance was part of the price of keeping her family safe. One evening, as she rested in the sunlit nursery, arranging tiny blankets and imagining the tiny hands that would soon wrap around her fingers, Tina felt a sudden sharp pain that stole her breath. It was brief, yet intense, a sensation that made her knees buckle slightly as she leaned against the crib for support. Her heart raced, fear whispering insistently in the back of her mind. Brian, sensing the sudden shift, appeared instantly at her side, his eyes wide, hands steady as he guided her to sit carefully on the plush chair. "Breathe, Tina. Talk to me." "What's happening?" he asked, his voice calm yet laced with urgency. Tears sprang to her eyes, not just from pain, but from the vulnerability that reminded her of nights past, nights when no one had been there to care, to fight for her. Alex, sensing the tension, toddled closer, small hands reaching for her as if to reassure her that he too understood the need for calm. Brian's fingers brushed her temple, over her cheek, tracing gentle circles that seemed to anchor her even as her body trembled. He checked her pulse, noting its steady rise, his mind calculating possibilities, planning immediate care should the situation worsen. Her breath caught as the pain intensified, sharper and more alarming than before. Brian's deep voice, usually soothing, now carried a commanding urgency. "We're going to the hospital, Tina. You're not alone, I'm right here." He lifted her carefully, each movement deliberate, supporting her as they hurried to the waiting car. Alex's small hand waved from the doorway, worry etched on his tiny face, and Brian nodded reassuringly, giving him a brief, warm smile that promised safety and return. The drive was tense, every second a delicate balance of urgency and caution. Tina's hand rested on her belly, her mind racing with a mixture of fear and hope, thoughts of Alex and the new life inside her. Brian's eyes never left her, his hands steady on the wheel, and every few moments he murmured reassurances, whispers of protection and love that acted as a lifeline in the storm of her anxiety. By the time they arrived at the hospital, the night had deepened into a tense quiet, punctuated only by the soft hum of machinery and the occasional distant siren. Nurses rushed to meet them, quickly assessing her condition, guiding her to a bed with efficiency and care. Brian remained close, his hand never leaving hers, his voice whispering encouragement and grounding her even as her body betrayed her with sudden, alarming contractions. As Tina gripped Brian's hand, her eyes wide with fear, a sudden spike in pain left her gasping, and the monitors began to beep urgently. The doctors exchanged quick, worried glances, realizing that both Tina and her unborn child were in imminent danger. Brian's jaw tightened, his protective instincts flaring as he whispered, "Hold on, Tina. We're going to get through this. Together." But even in the midst of love and unwavering care, the night held a dangerous uncertainty that threatened to test every ounce of courage, hope, and devotion in their growing family. The atmosphere in the hospital room was tense, a delicate mixture of urgency and hope as doctors and nurses moved with synchronized precision, preparing Tina for labor. The soft beep of monitors, the shuffle of shoes on linoleum, and the quiet, determined voices of the medical staff created a rhythm that seemed both comforting and alarming at the same time. Tina clutched Brian's hand tightly, her knuckles white from the combination of pain, anticipation, and the overwhelming flood of emotions coursing through her. His thumb brushed over her fingers in slow, soothing circles, a quiet anchor in the storm of contractions and fear. Brian's gaze never wavered from hers. Every flicker of discomfort, every tremor of uncertainty in her eyes, he met with unwavering focus. His deep voice whispered constant reassurances, soft yet firm, echoing the promises he had made since the moment he had first cradled her collapsing form in his arms. "You're safe, Tina. I'm right here. We're going to bring our little girl into this world together," he murmured, his words wrapping around her like a warm, protective cloak. Tina's breaths came in ragged gasps, her body racked by the intensity of labor. Yet Brian's presence gave her a strange strength she hadn't known she possessed. Alex, now a little older and fully aware of the situation, watched from a small corner of the room, his wide eyes reflecting both curiosity and concern. "Mommy, is the baby coming now?" he asked softly, his small hand brushing the edge of her gown. Tina forced a shaky smile, nodding gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Soon. Mommy's very brave, just like you." Brian leaned over, lifting Alex carefully into his arms, holding him close so he could witness the birth without fear, and whispered in his ear about the miracle about to unfold, ensuring that Alex's excitement mingled with comfort rather than anxiety. Hours seemed to stretch infinitely, each contraction a wave of both physical agony and emotional intensity. Tina's body trembled under the relentless rhythm, her heart pounding as every sound, every movement became magnified in the sterile, brightly lit room. Brian remained at her side, guiding her breathing, encouraging her to focus, holding her hand, pressing gentle kisses to her temple, murmuring words of unwavering support. His presence was more than comfort. It was a promise, a shield against the panic that threatened to rise inside her. "Push, Tina." "You're almost there," the lead doctor instructed, voice calm yet urgent. Tina felt every ounce of her strength gathering, her body responding to instinct, the culmination of weeks and months of growth, anticipation, and love. Brian's hand squeezed hers, his lips barely brushing the side of her face. "You can do this, my love. Our baby is almost here," he whispered, his eyes glistening with a mix of pride and awe. Each contraction became a battle, yet a strange exhilaration coursed through her veins, fueled by the knowledge that she was about to meet the newest life that tied their family together. Finally, after hours that felt like an eternity, a sharp cry cut through the room, the unmistakable piercing sound of life. Tina collapsed back into the pillows, tears streaming freely, relief washing over her in tidal waves. Brian's hands were steady as he lifted the tiny infant from the sterile sheets, cradling her carefully, her fragile body warm and alive in his grasp. The baby's eyes blinked open, and a small, delicate cry echoed once more, filling the room with a sense of miraculous completion. "It's a girl," the nurse announced softly, a smile of pure joy crossing her face. Brian's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he gazed at Tina, then at the tiny life in his arms, his voice trembling despite the strength he always carried. "Look at her, Tina. She's perfect. Both of our children, our family, safe. I promise you, I will always protect you, both of you, with everything I have." Tina reached out, her hands trembling, her eyes brimming with tears as she touched the tiny fingers of their daughter, feeling the miraculous warmth and softness. Her heart overflowed with love and gratitude, a torrent of emotions that had been building since the day she first collapsed in despair. Alex was brought forward carefully, his small hands reaching for his sister, eyes wide with awe and wonder. "Hi, baby sister," he whispered, his voice soft and reverent, as if speaking to a sacred presence. Tina's lips quivered as she watched the interaction, the moment crystallizing in her mind as the purest representation of family, love, and the future she had fought so hard to reclaim. Brian guided Alex gently, showing him how to touch softly, how to hold the new baby with care and reverence, all the while reinforcing the unbreakable bond they shared as a family. Hours passed in a blur of soft touches, whispered encouragements, and quiet laughter. Tina's body was exhausted, yet her heart soared higher than it ever had before. Brian never left her side, alternating between holding Alex, cradling their daughter, and remaining steadfast beside Tina, his presence a constant promise of safety, devotion, and unwavering love. The luxurious room felt warmer, alive with joy, and every moment reinforced the reality that the shadows of the past could never touch the life they had created together. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion transformed into a haven of laughter, joy, and shared discovery. The children's giggles echoed through the halls as Tina and Brian navigated the delicate balance of parenting, work, and shared intimacy. Nights were filled with quiet whispers, soft touches, and the occasional playful laugh as Alex and his baby sister slept nearby, their innocence a living reminder of the triumph over despair that had brought this family into being. Tina and Brian's love deepened every day, their connection a tapestry of care, desire, and mutual respect, built upon the foundation of shared hardships, victories, and unwavering commitment. Kevin's presence had long vanished from their lives, reduced to a distant memory, a shadow that could no longer darken their joy. Tina's confidence blossomed alongside her love for Brian, each day reinforcing that the choices she had made, the risks she had taken, and the strength she had mustered had led to this extraordinary life. Luxury, love, passion, and family intertwined seamlessly, creating a sanctuary where the past's scars became lessons rather than burdens. Brian's gaze often lingered on Tina in moments of quiet reflection, watching her laugh with Alex, cradling their daughter, or simply resting in contentment. In his eyes was a promise, unspoken yet clear, that this life, this family, and this love were eternal. Every day was a testament to what could be built when care, devotion, and courage intersected with the miracle of life. Tina's heart, once fractured by betrayal and fear, now beat with complete fulfillment, radiating joy and gratitude. One evening, as the family gathered in the softly lit living room, Tina looked at Brian, who held both children gently, their tiny faces glowing in the lamplight. His eyes met hers, filled with a depth of emotion that words could never capture. In that gaze was an unspoken vow, a promise that no darkness, no past betrayal, and no future uncertainty could ever break. This was not just an ending. It was a beginning, a beautiful forever, crafted from love, passion, and unyielding devotion. And in that quiet, perfect moment, Tina understood with absolute certainty. Their story, their love, and their extraordinary family were just starting, and nothing could ever change the life they had fought so hard to create. And that's the end of today's story on Beyond Color Stories. Tina's heartbreak, her miracle, and the love that transformed her life. It's proof that even in the darkest moments, hope and true love can conquer all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because every click helps us bring you more stories full of emotion, passion, and drama. And remember, every ending is just the beginning of a new story. Stay tuned, because the next one will be even bigger.